I wish I could say my writing routine was consistent, but mostly it's just me blocking out time and going up to my cabin in the North Georgia mountains and really sitting down and doing the work. If I'm left to my own devices, I can be fairly lazy, so I have to be very structured when I'm writing. And I'll go up there and spend, maybe a week or 10 days, and I'll write straight through for 12, 15 hours. And when I come home, I can barely stand up. It used to be a lot easier when I was younger to sit down and do that kind of work, but now I feel like I'm an old woman when I get back. But that's really a way that I've always worked. Before I had the great gift of being published, I had to write whenever I could find time, and I would go to work and do my regular job, but I would wake up at 5 in the morning so I could write before I went to work. And then when I got home, I would write. And then on the weekends, I would write. So I'm used to these quick bursts. And it's made me over the years really, really hate other writers like Michael Connelly or Laura Lippman who, have these civilized get up and do the gym and then write for 4 hours and then drink tea by the fountain or whatever they're doing, because I just think, oh God, why didn't I do it that way? But they came from newspaper backgrounds, so they were used to having those daily deadlines. And my deadline is December 31st, basically. So if you had to work and you were told that your deadline was one day at the end of the year, you would probably have the busiest November and December ever. And the rest of the time you would just play around, which I did my first couple of books, but now I've learned that I have to be more disciplined about it. I'd like to think that I'm just super creative, but I'm sure that some of my characters are based on actual people I know. I've never purposefully said, okay, well, this person is going to be in the book. I've used mannerisms or catchphrases. My plumber is very delighted because she has a habit of calling people mama. And I have a character in the book who calls people mama. I told her about that. It didn't give me a discount. But I like to just incorporate mannerisms. And I've never had anyone who really noticed themselves. I think that people are not very good at noticing their own characteristics or traits that other people might pick up on. And that's always fun. So, no one's really complained. I did have early on someone say to me, oh, I know who this is. It's that awful biddy down the street. And I thought, no, it's you, but let's just say it's that biddy. Avoid any future lawsuits. What I do is, mostly I draw from my surroundings when I'm writing. So when I'm up at the cabin, there's a pasture right across the way from me, and there are cows. So I'll find that people chew like a cow chewing cud, or there are donkeys and someone laughs and the laughter is like a donkey braying. There are chickens in the backyard at my neighbor's house, and I've noticed that people are cocky like roosters because there's a rooster over there, or someone is cawing like a bird in Coptown, for instance. But I do look for names in different places. It's very hard to come up with names because it's a way to define a character. And sometimes I'll look through my Facebook page, which can be very confusing because a lot of Dutch people and Finnish people and Bavarians are on there. So, when I'm looking through for names, I have to find something that will be appropriate for that book. In Coptown, I use the name of my cat, Maggie, because I just thought that would be appropriate. And I use the name Kate because I've always liked the name Kate. I'm a big Katharine Hepburn fan. And I didn't realize until I was halfway through the novel and I was writing kind of a sexy scene. Oh, wait, my editor in England is named Kate. So that was very disconcerting from that moment on because I had to really work not to associate that character with her. But, that's the fun of writing, is coming up with different things and just making stuff up. All of my novels are set in Georgia, and that's because I love Georgia. I think you should write what you know, but I think you should also want to write what you want to know about. Let me start all over again. Sorry about that. All of my novels are set in Georgia, and part of that is because I really love Georgia. The other part is you should write what you know. I think that you should also write what you want to know about, and I want to know more about the state and what drives people and how communities react when something bad happens. And all of my books really start with setting that sense of place. You know, in Coptown, it opens up with you meeting a character named Jimmy Lawson, but you meet him through the city. He's running through the streets. You know, he's going down Edgewood Avenue. You see the trees, you see the parks, you see the buildings. And this is 1975, so a lot of the cityscape that is very familiar to me is just being created during this time. There was a huge building boom at that point, and I talk about how the skyscrapers are pulling these, or rather the construction cranes are pulling the skyscrapers out of the ground. And that's a really important part of the story, is not just the city, but how the city is changing. Because in 1975, this is when you saw the big shift. We went from a minority white city to what we are today, which is a minority African American city. And the new population did what populations do, is they want representation that looks like them, that understands their needs, and we got Maynard Jackson out of that. Probably one of the best mayors of any American city, not just at that time, but probably in history. And he did tremendous things for the city, and one of the big things was he wanted to change the police force. He wanted the people who were policing the city to look more like the people who lived in the city. And this was a huge shift, and it caused a lot of problems. There were lots of lawsuits, but I wanted to set Coptown during this very pivotal time when, you know, all this transition is happening, and we see it kind of from both sides. We see how the police respond, what the city thinks, what the different neighborhoods think about it, because of course someone living in a ghetto has a different opinion about change than someone who is living a very nice, plush life in Buckhead, which is one of our very wealthy neighborhoods. It's the 11th wealthiest neighborhood in America. So you're definitely going to have a different point of view about things changing. And talking about these neighborhoods and giving people perspective on the response that someone, say, in a wealthy neighborhood has as opposed to a poor one, I think translates into what we're seeing today, because we're always hearing about class divide and the rich and the have-nots and all of that thing. And I think that you can talk about it more openly if you said it in the past. And it's really interesting to figure out as a writer, hey, a lot of the stuff I'm writing about in the 1970s is happening today. I always get questions from aspiring authors about what's the secret formula. And I always tell them that there's no formula. I think the only thing you can do as an author is to write the best story you can write. You can't anticipate market. No one knew the Da Vinci Code was going to be huge. No one knew The Help or Gone Girl was going to be huge. And when Gillian Flynn sat down to write Gone Girl, she didn't think this is going to be #1 forever. She thought, this is a story I want to tell. She didn't do market research, and no one does when they really hit. What it takes is a love of story, an understanding of character, and really working on making sure that this is the best book you can write. And I think the biggest gift you can give to yourself as an author is to read other authors. And you're not doing it because you want to see what's working, or you're not going to read The Help and say, I'm going to write the next Help. You need to write the book you want to read. And I think that many people lose sight of the fact that they started being writers, or they wanted to be a writer because they read a book that inspired them and made them want to do better and made them want to tell their own story. So it's a very symbiotic relationship between reading and writing. And I hate when I hear authors say, oh, I don't really have time to read, or I haven't read this book everyone's reading, because it's sort of your job. You wouldn't want to go to a doctor who said, well, after medical school, why would I read anything else? Everything changes, and people are doing stuff in different ways, and that's a great source of inspiration. If I was stuck on a desert island, and I could only take 3 books, probably I'd do Gone with the Wind, because it's a fantastic story. It's very well written. The Bible, just because it's big. There are lots of pages, and I wouldn't want to be rescued and they found out I was reading something like Diana Gabaldon, even though I do read it and love it. And an empty journal, so I could write my own stories, because I'm a writer, and probably I'd have a lot of time on a desert island between foraging for food and crying, so I could just sit down and maybe write my own fan fiction about Gone with the Wind. My favorite crime drama no longer exists, unfortunately, and that was Breaking Bad. And I think that what I loved most about that show was it wasn't about the crime so much as the drama. You know, what happens to these people when they sort of stumble into this nefarious underworld, and how does it change them? And I think that how Walter White responds, it brings out the worst things in him. And I think that that's kind of an interesting parallel because, you know, if you think about fame or, you know, being an athlete or anything that you're really good at that brings you some sort of recognition, it can kind of make you a jerk if you're already a jerk. And for Walter White, I think he was kind of a jerk, and it really made him just this phenomenal jerk, and giving him a little bit of power just made him the worst of himself. And the people around him, it sort of made them the worst of themselves. And I think in relation to crime, that tells a lot, because if you think about what criminals do and how it affects people, and you know, if you think about cops investigating crimes and how tense and awful that is for everyone involved on both sides, what it does is it brings out the best and worst of them. And so that's why I think that Breaking Bad probably is one of the best crime dramas ever, because it does that so beautifully, and it gives every character equal weight. You know, it's not just a story about this guy. It's about his wife. It's about his family. It's about everybody. And to me, that's what crime fiction does, you know. It tells the story of the community and how crime changes it. I guess because of what I write, people always want to know two things: what scares me, which is none of your business, and you know, if I had to write my own death, what would that be like? I would not want to be brutalized by a serial killer, believe it or not. My death would be, hopefully, I'm 110 years old, I go to sleep, and I don't wake up. So, sorry, I can't come up with something more interesting. Maybe if we talk about your death, it'll be a little different. And probably take place in a prison. But my last meal, I think about that a lot. There's a great website, oh, I say great, but it's sort of horrific, where they record what inmates on death row in America have as their last meal. And I'm always fascinated by what they choose, because I think, gosh, if I knew this was my last meal, how would I be able to eat? And they have 10 hamburgers and fried chicken and steak and all this. And I think, well, probably the people in the kitchen end up eating it. But I mean, who knows? Do you really want to die on a full stomach? But for me, probably, if I didn't know it was my last meal, it would certainly be something along the lines of cupcakes and, you know, cakey kind of things. I would not worry about proteins or a balanced meal. I certainly wouldn't eat a salad. But you know, when I was a kid, my dad said to me, because all I wanted to eat when I was a kid was cake, and he said to me, when you're a grown-up, you can eat whatever you want, but now you have to eat this. So the first week I lived by myself, every night for dinner I ate cake, and I got so sick, and I called my dad and I told him that I did that, and he really enjoyed that story, because he said it just proved he was always right. Unfortunately, it did not make me stop eating cake.